Right now, as you're watching this, something unprecedented is unfolding in the Middle East, and the silence from Western media should tell you everything you need to know. Iranian fighter jets have scrambled into the skies, and simultaneously, leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has relocated to secure underground bunkers. This isn't a drill. This isn't posturing. This is the kind of movement we see in the final hours before major military operations begin. But here's what they're not telling you. This didn't happen in a vacuum. For months, we've watched the chess pieces move across the board, escalating tensions between Iran and Israel, unprecedented military buildups, covert operations that occasionally break through the media blackout, and a proxy war architecture that's been carefully constructed across Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. The bunker movements aren't just about defense. They signal that Iran's leadership believes a critical threshold has been crossed. When commanders move to hardened facilities, they're preparing for two possibilities: launching a major strike or absorbing one. And in either scenario, the implications for global oil markets, Middle Eastern stability, and the broader balance of power between East and West are staggering. The real question isn't whether this escalates, it's whether anyone can stop it from spiraling into something far larger than a regional conflict. Let me take you back to understand how we arrived at this razor's edge moment, because nothing in geopolitics happens spontaneously. What we're witnessing right now is the culmination of decisions made in boardrooms, military command centers, and intelligence agencies stretching back years, if not decades. The Iranian fighter jets taking off and IRGC commanders descending into reinforced bunkers represent a flashpoint in a much longer story, one that Western audiences have been systematically conditioned to misunderstand. You see, the dominant narrative we've been fed about Iran paints them as irrational actors, religious extremists operating without strategic logic, hell-bent on regional domination and the destruction of Israel. But that's a cartoon version of reality designed to bypass your critical thinking. Iran is actually one of the most strategically patient and calculating powers in the Middle East. They've survived 4 decades of the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever imposed on a nation. They've built an extensive network of regional allies and proxy forces, not through reckless aggression, but through careful investment in relationships, shared ideological frameworks, and mutual defense interests. They've developed indigenous military capabilities that have consistently surprised Western intelligence analysts, who underestimated their technical sophistication. This is not a regime that makes impulsive moves. So when Iranian jets scramble and leadership goes underground, we need to ask the uncomfortable question that mainstream analysis refuses to touch. What exactly did they see coming? What intelligence crossed their desks that made this level of preparation necessary? Because here's what we know from open sources alone. Over the past 6 months, there has been an unprecedented increase in Israeli military exercises, simulating long-range strikes. We've seen unusual movements of American military assets into the region, not the routine rotations, but significant deployments of advanced air defense systems, strategic bombers positioned at forward bases, and carrier strike groups maintaining station in the eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf simultaneously. We've witnessed a dramatic uptick in alleged Israeli covert operations inside Iran, including assassinations of nuclear scientists, sabotage of military facilities, and cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Each of these incidents alone might be dismissed as isolated events, but taken together, they form a pattern that any serious military leadership would have to interpret as preparatory actions for a major offensive. Now let's talk about what bunker movements actually signify in military doctrine, because this isn't some symbolic gesture. When National Command Authority relocates to hardened underground facilities, they're implementing continuity of government protocols. These are the procedures designed to ensure that even if a first strike decapitates surface leadership and communications infrastructure, there remains a protected command structure capable of directing military responses. The fact that IRGC leadership has made this move tells us they assess the threat level as existential. They're not worried about another limited strike on a weapons depot or a targeted assassination. They're preparing for the possibility of a comprehensive attack aimed at degrading Iran's military capabilities across the board, their nuclear facilities, missile production sites, command and control networks, air defense systems, naval assets, and perhaps most critically, their ability to activate and coordinate their regional proxy network. Think about the strategic calculus from Tehran's perspective for a moment. They've invested enormous resources building what they call the axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza. This network serves multiple purposes. It provides strategic depth, ensuring that any attack on Iran can be met with responses from multiple vectors that their adversaries must defend against. It allows for plausible deniability, as these groups maintain some degree of independent decision-making even while receiving Iranian support, and it creates a deterrent equation where attacking Iran means potentially opening multiple fronts simultaneously. But here's the vulnerability in that system. It requires intact command, control, communications, and intelligence networks to coordinate effectively. If an initial strike could sever those connections, the entire architecture could be paralyzed precisely when Iran needs it most. This brings us to the question of Israeli intentions and American complicity, because let's be absolutely clear about something that polite discourse tends to obscure. Israel has been openly advocating for military action against Iran's nuclear program for over 15 years. Every few years we hear renewed drumbeats about Iran being months away from a nuclear weapon, about red lines being crossed, about the unacceptability of a nuclear-armed Iran. Netanyahu has made this a centerpiece of his political career, and while American administrations have varied in their enthusiasm for direct military confrontation, the underlying strategic alignment has remained consistent. Both nations view a nuclear-capable Iran as fundamentally unacceptable, regardless of whether Iran actually weaponizes that capability or maintains it at a breakout threshold. But there's another layer here that goes beyond the nuclear issue, and it's absolutely crucial to understanding the current crisis. Iran represents the single largest obstacle to the complete reshaping of the Middle East, according to a vision that has been percolating in various strategic documents for decades. You can trace this back to the Project for a New American Century, to various think tank papers, to the Abraham Accords, and the normalization push between Israel and Arab states. The vision is essentially a Middle East where Iran is isolated, diminished, or regime changed into something compliant with Western interests, where Israel is integrated into regional security architecture, and where the flow of energy resources and trade routes operates under frameworks favorable to American and Allied control. Iran, by maintaining its independence, by refusing integration into this system, by supporting groups that resist this vision, by developing indigenous capabilities that can't be easily sanctioned away, represents what strategists call a spoiler, a power that can disrupt plans even if it can't necessarily impose its own alternative vision. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the convergence of several factors that create what military planners might see as a window of opportunity. First, Iran's nuclear program has advanced to a point where the technical knowledge and infrastructure can't be bombed away. You can destroy facilities, but you can't unknow the science. This creates pressure for action before that threshold is completely crossed. Second, the regional landscape has shifted with the Abraham Accords, creating new possibilities for coordinated action and overflight rights that didn't exist before. Third, there's been significant technological advancement in bunker-busting munitions, cyber warfare capabilities, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems that make previously impossible targets potentially vulnerable. And fourth, there are domestic political considerations in both Israel and potentially the United States that make bold military action attractive to certain leadership factions. Now here's where we need to talk about the absolutely catastrophic risks that this entire situation carries, because the people making these decisions seem to operate with a dangerous combination of overconfidence and underestimation. There appears to be a belief in certain strategic circles that Iran can be struck hard enough to degrade its capabilities without triggering a regional war that spirals beyond anyone's control. This is the same kind of thinking that brought us the Iraq War, which was supposed to be a quick, decisive operation that would reshape the region. Instead, it destabilized multiple countries, created millions of refugees, cost trillions of dollars, and ultimately strengthened Iranian influence in Iraq. The same pattern of wishful thinking that assumed Libya could be regime changed without creating a failed state that now serves as a corridor for weapons trafficking and human smuggling. The same miscalculation that turned Syria into a multi-year catastrophe with global implications. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. It's a nation of over 80 million people with a functioning, if strained, economy. It has strategic depth with mountainous terrain that makes invasion impractical. It has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this scenario, hardening facilities, dispersing assets, creating redundancy in command structures. Most importantly, it has the capability to respond in ways that could genuinely destabilize global energy markets and trigger wider conflict. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil supply flows, is well within range of Iranian missiles and mines. Saudi oil facilities, which we know are vulnerable from the 2019 Abqaiq attack, could be struck by drones and cruise missiles. American bases throughout the region, housing thousands of personnel, are within range of Iranian ballistic missiles that have demonstrated concerning accuracy in recent tests. And then there's the regional proxy network that could activate across multiple countries simultaneously. But even beyond these immediate tactical considerations, there's a deeper strategic dimension that Western planners seem to consistently misjudge. Iran is not operating in isolation. It has developed increasingly substantial relationships with both Russia and China. Now, I'm not suggesting that either power would directly intervene militarily on Iran's behalf, but the geopolitical implications are profound. Russia relies on Iran as a partner in Syria and as a player that can complicate American strategic bandwidth. China depends on Iranian energy and sees Iran as a crucial node in Belt and Road infrastructure. Both nations view the containment and subordination of Iran as part of a broader American-led effort to maintain global primacy that ultimately targets them as well. An attack on Iran would be interpreted in Beijing and Moscow not just as a Middle Eastern crisis, but as a demonstration of American willingness to use military force to prevent the emergence of any alternative pole of power. This is where we have to zoom out and see the current crisis not just as a Middle Eastern flashpoint, but as a symptom of a larger global transition that's underway. We're living through the messy, dangerous process of moving from a unipolar world order dominated by American power to something more multipolar. That transition is happening whether anyone wants it or not, driven by economic realities, technological diffusion, and the simple fact that other nations have grown in relative capability while developing their own strategic interests. The question is whether that transition happens through negotiation, accommodation, and the gradual establishment of new frameworks, or whether it happens through a series of increasingly dangerous confrontations where declining hegemons try to reassert dominance through military means. What terrifies me about the current situation with Iranian jets scrambling and commanders in bunkers is that it represents exactly the kind of moment where miscalculation can cascade into catastrophe. Both sides are operating on assumptions about the other's intentions and capabilities that may be fundamentally flawed. Iranian leadership may believe that demonstrating readiness and resolve will deter an attack, not realizing that visible preparation might actually be interpreted as imminent offensive action that justifies preemption. Israeli and American planners may believe they can execute a limited strike that stays below the threshold of full-scale war, not realizing that Iran's leadership, having made the political decision to move to bunkers, may feel they have no choice but to respond massively to maintain credibility. And everyone is operating with imperfect intelligence under time pressure, with domestic political considerations that may override strategic rationality. There's also the question of what happens if this does escalate into open conflict. The economic implications alone are staggering. Global oil markets are already tight, with strategic petroleum reserves depleted from previous releases and production capacity constraints limiting the ability to quickly compensate for supply disruptions. If Iranian action closes or even significantly impedes traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, we could see oil prices spike to levels that trigger global recession. That's not hyperbole. It's the assessment of energy analysts across the spectrum. And in an already fragile global economy dealing with inflation pressures, debt overhangs, and banking sector instability, an energy shock of that magnitude could be the trigger for a financial crisis that makes 2008 look manageable. Then there are the humanitarian costs that tend to get abstracted away in strategic discussions. We're talking about a potential conflict that could kill tens of thousands in the initial exchanges, create millions of refugees, destroy infrastructure that took decades to build, and poison political relations for generations. The Middle East has already endured decades of warfare, from the Iran-Iraq War to the Gulf Wars to the post-2003 catastrophes to the Syrian civil war. The human suffering has been immense, and the prospect of adding another major conflict to that ledger should give anyone pause. But in the sanitized language of strategic studies, these realities become collateral damage and acceptable costs in pursuit of objectives that, when you examine them closely, often turn out to be based on flawed assumptions and threat inflation. So what are we to make of this moment? I think we need to be very clear-eyed about several things. First, the situation is genuinely dangerous, and the people downplaying the risks are either ignorant or dishonest. When military forces move to high alert and leadership goes to bunkers, that's not theater, it's preparation for war. Second, the narrative you'll hear in mainstream Western media will almost certainly present this as Iranian aggression or provocation, when the reality is far more complex and involves actions by multiple parties over extended time frames. Third, there are powerful interests that actually want this confrontation and have been working to create the conditions for it for years. Fourth, the consequences of getting this wrong are so severe that they should counsel extreme caution, but the track record suggests that caution is often the first casualty of strategic ambition. What can be done at this point? Realistically, probably not much by ordinary citizens in the immediate term, because these decisions are being made in classified settings by people who are largely insulated from democratic accountability on matters of national security. But there are things worth understanding and worth demanding. We should demand actual evidence and transparent debate before any military action, not just intelligence community assertions that we're supposed to accept on faith. We should insist on exploring diplomatic alternatives, even difficult ones that require compromise, because war should genuinely be a last resort, not a preferred tool of statecraft. We should question the strategic assumptions that underlie these policies, asking whether the objectives are truly achievable and whether the costs are truly acceptable. And we should remember the lessons of past disasters, where confident predictions of quick victories and manageable consequences proved devastatingly wrong. The Iranian jets in the sky and the commanders in their bunkers are telling us something crucial. We are closer to a major war in the Middle East than at any point in recent memory. Whether that war actually happens depends on decisions being made right now in Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington. Those decisions are being influenced by decades of policy choices, strategic doctrines, threat perceptions, and domestic political pressures. Understanding that context doesn't give us control over the outcome, but it does give us the ability to see through the inevitable propaganda, to ask the right questions, and to demand accountability from those who would lead us into yet another catastrophic conflict. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the people who most confidently advocate for war are rarely the ones who pay its heaviest costs.